Untold Stories is a conference started in 2019 by Startup Europe Networks and Startup Hungary. We believe founder stories are powerful, and we pride ourselves on having real, no BS conversations to inspire and educate our community. Building off of our offline events, we developed this podcast with TechCamp Global to bring you untold stories from the region's best founders year-round. In each episode, we try to uncover the details and hands-on tactics behind the founders' successes so you can skip their mistakes and benefit from their years of experience and lessons learned. Our hope is that you will be able to find new ways to accelerate your growth. Let's dive in. My name is Mary Alcantara, and this is the Untold Stories Podcast. István Csanády is the CEO and founder of Shapr3D. Shapr3D is reinventing 3D CAD for the next generation of designers. Shapr prides themselves on innovating in not only the product, but the distribution side of manufacturing and design software. Today, we're sitting down with István to talk about his journey, raising from top-tier investors, and to share some exciting new releases planned for this year. István, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to become an entrepreneur in the first place?
I guess I'm the typical unemployable type of entrepreneur. So I graduated as a software engineer, but before I graduated, I had another CAD startup actually 10 years ago that failed. And then I joined an enterprise SaaS company where I worked as a software engineer for a few years, and I had to realize that this is really not for me. I really like to have a much broader perspective. I like to think on higher level than most software engineers, I guess. And I love software engineering as a discipline, and I love to write code. Unfortunately, I don't have time to write code anymore, but I love to write code. But overall, I just find the same joy, I guess, in building an organization that I found in building a product or writing code. I think in many ways it's a very similar problem actually. So basically, that's how I guess. It always this industry that we are in, the 3D design and manufacturing industry, it always fascinated me. I started to learn 3D design or 3D CAD when I was a teenager. I was just 13 years old, and I started to learn coding when I was 6 years old actually. So I had these two nerdish hobbies during my childhood, and funny thing is that I was not a typical nerd, right? I love Star Trek, but I would never go to a Trekkie event or anything.
You're not helping your case here, István.
But yeah, I was not a typical nerd kid. I was doing competitive fencing, for example. And but I love technology. I love building software or writing software. And when the first iPhone came out, I started writing apps with the jailbroken SDK, and that was a lot of fun. And when the App Store was launched, 3 days after the launch, my first app was there that we wrote with a friend of mine. And I guess these were the three main things that influenced my thinking around Shapr initially.
So you started off, so you've always been interested in technology. You were a developer from the age of 6, it sounds like, and you were working first in the software company before you had your previous CAD startup?
So I had my own startup. I wrote my first app that made like $20K US dollars in 2 months, and that was actually a great feeling. I still remember it. We were on our second year in the university, so like $20K for 2 guys.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, exactly. Like that was a lot of money for us. So that taught me that you can actually make money by building software. And then I started my other CAD company, and we worked on it for 2 years, but we were way too inexperienced, and we were way too naive, and also the world was completely different. By the time, like, fundraising was completely different. You couldn't really get proper funding in Europe in general. Like, so if you wanted to build something, you've had to move to the valley. Well, a lot has changed since then, but by the time it was like that. And so that startup failed, and then I joined this enterprise SaaS company that after a few years, I just didn't see myself working at a typical traditional enterprise SaaS company. It was just not for me.
So then you decided to go back to the startup world and try your hand a
Yeah.
second time.
Yeah, it was not that obvious, to be honest. So when I quit, I didn't really know what I was going to do after. So I just know that I think I was pretty sure that I want to start a company, but what that was going to be, that was not entirely clear. There were rumors about the iPad Pro by the time. This was in 2014. So basically a year before the iPad Pro was launched. And then I just made a big bet on the iPad Pro. I just thought that these rumors about the iPad Pro, that Apple is going to release a pro-grade iPad that will have a stylus, it will just mean that Apple is going to completely reposition the iPad from being a content consumption device to become a content creation device. And that felt like a huge opportunity. It felt like that this is something that can change consumer behavior, that can change how people think about this new platform that by the time was like positioned as something like the iPad was basically positioned as an e-paper tool, right? Like an e-book, right? But it was really not. But this is still how people perceived it. And I just thought that this was going to change. And if this was going to change, then this is a great opportunity to build something completely new, build something from scratch. And CAD was already there in the back of my mind. So, I just combined these two interesting topics. And this is how Shapr3D was born.
So your first CAD startup failed partially, I guess, because you ran out of money. So
yeah, every startup failed.
Yeah. Classic reason.
Yeah.
But was it also were you trying to do something similar to what Shapr3D became, or what kind of lessons did you bring with you from that experience?
Yeah, I think our ambition was quite similar by the time. So basically, we wanted to build a next generation design tool for professional designers, but we approached this problem from the opposite direction, and that actually made it really, really hard to succeed. So basically, we built a really complex but incredibly sophisticated tool, 3D design tool, that was positioned really to the for the highest end of designers. I think like maybe there are like 100 people in the world who could have taken advantage of what we built by the time, which could have been, by the way, a good strategy, but that requires a completely different go-to-market strategy. And we didn't have any go-to-market strategy. we just thought that this is an interesting product that we are building. So with Shapr, we took the literally the opposite direction, and we built something that removed the barrier of entry from
something that was accessible to even kind of an amateur or freelance kind of dabbler,
like prosumer type of customers. And this is basically so. And it's really interesting because if you lower the barrier of entry to anything, that can completely change an industry, because then businesses and consumers start to behave differently. So, for example, in the case of Shapr, when you look at the ease of use of our product, you probably the first thing that you think is that this is for beginners, right? But the thing is that by lowering the barrier of entry to 3D design, we democratized access to 3D, professional 3D CAD, even at large organizations. And it is changing the way how these teams are designing. So what happens if you don't need a dedicated CAD designer who's using the CAD system, and that's his or her full-time job that that he's using the CAD system, right? So what happens if anyone who has an idea in a design and manufacturing company can actually make a professional industrial grade 3D model of it? And that's super interesting. That is opening up a lot of new opportunities.
So Shapr3D was basically taking advantage of, you kind of had a hunch that this iPad Pro was going to be a thing. And so you were it was the right timing, and also the different approach that was, what made you, I think, successful, focusing on lowering the barriers to entry rather than designing a super, complex product for only the top tier of users. What can you tell us about kind of the evolution of the product since then? Because so much has changed even in the past, 5 years, thinking about when the first iPad Pro was launched till now. How has that informed your kind of product development strategy? Yeah.
Just a disclaimer, I don't think that we are successful yet. We are definitely on track, but we are not yet successful. I think that's super important.
Well, you've been featured a few times on the App Store, and you won the Design Award from Apple. So
that's true, but I don't think that's the best metric to measure success. But indeed,
it's a start.
And we even won an Apple Design Award last year, which
Congratulations.
is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Much. We are super proud of that. But yeah, so the product. How did the product evolve over the last 7 years or over the last 5 years, actually? That's a good question, because I think that Shapr is one of those extremely rare companies that are going in the same direction since the very beginning. And we haven't really pivoted since 2016 or 2015. We when the iPad Pro was launched, we decided that we are going to build this 3D CAD system for professional designers, primarily for the iPad, and we will focus on these new generation tablets that have like touch screens and have a stylus and now they have a keyboard and a mouse. So we thought that this is going to be the future, that the desktop platforms and the tablet platforms are going to converge. And in 2015, that was really a bold statement. Like, still everybody thought of iPads as toys, right? And there weren't any signs that this was going to change. But we made a big bet on this, and apparently that was a very good decision, because now it's super clear, right? Like, Microsoft has been going in this direction for quite a while with the Microsoft Surface devices, and the majority of new Windows-based devices are sold with a touch screen and with a stylus. So that's amazing. And the iPad and the Mac are quite clearly getting closer and closer to each other every year. So now it's clear that this is the direction where the world of personal computing is heading. And we just doubled down on this. And if I had to summarize what we've been doing in the last 5 years, I think the best way to think of Shapr is that we spend a lot of time and effort on thinking about how the world has changed in the last 30 years when the current market leader CAD systems were designed. And we are thinking what has changed since then. And we are trying to figure out that how these changes enable us to build something that is a much better fit for the needs of 2021. Because clearly traditional CAD systems are not bad or anything. They are great. But they were designed for the needs of a completely different world. Because since the 1990s, literally everything has changed, right? The kind of computers that we are using has changed. The way how we work, the way how we collaborate has changed. Everything has changed except CAD. And we think that this is a huge opportunity. So we are not trying to reproduce what traditional CAD companies are doing. We are trying to figure out how can we serve our customers better than a traditional CAD system, thanks to these changes that we have seen in the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And yeah, everything you're saying is, less about the product and kind of about the market opportunities. And I'm sure, you're enabling this kind of revolution in this space, like what you were talking about, democratizing how people, the ideas, and anybody can create now this professional model using Shapr3D. Do you have any stories about kind of customer behaviors that you've witnessed changing as a result of using your product?
Oh yeah, sure. I can give you two or a few really, really good examples from the two ends of the spectrum. Like on the super high end spectrum, we have Fortune 500 companies as customers, Shapr3D customers, and they are using Shapr exactly what I mentioned a few minutes ago, that basically they are democratizing access to 3D CAD inside the company, and that's amazing. So they are removing a lot of load from their dedicated CAD designers or CAD operators, and they are enabling everyone else who traditionally work together with the CAD operator to design in 3D and to be a part of the design process. And I think this is fascinating because this is an amazing market expansion opportunity. And of course, we are also seeing some customers, typically smaller customers, who are replacing their traditional CAD systems with Shapr. That's like a more traditional use case. But on the other end of the spectrum, where we are opening up 3D CAD for a completely new audience, we are seeing really amazing success stories. Like there is this doctor in Syria, in Damascus, who has designed and built a hospital in Damascus using Shapr3D, because like after the war, Syria was completely destroyed, or it's still being destroyed, unfortunately, and they don't have any professional architects in the country anymore. So this doctor, they got an iPad somehow as a charity, and he started learning Shapr3D, and he designed an entire hospital, and that hospital was actually built
based on his designs.
Based on his designs, yeah. And I think this is absolutely amazing. Or there is another amazing customer story with a young designer from Peru who designed a new technology for building affordable housing in rural Peru for the poor. And that's again something that is probably would have never have happened if Shapr wasn't here. So that's and we are seeing a lot of these use cases where like I think that there are very few startups that have this actual physical connection to the world. This is something that you typically can have in a design and manufacturing software company. So this is something that we find really interesting, that how Shapr is actually like physically able to influence the world around our customers and our users. I think that's probably one of the most exciting aspects of this business.
And you mentioned this, that you have a pretty broad customer base. So you have, kind of on both ends of the spectrum, from the, amateur kind of freelance users all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. Yeah. How is that to cater to such a diverse array, or how do you feel about the challenges or benefits of this kind of approach?
So from the outside, these customers seem to be a completely different customer type, right?
Personas and everything.
But on the other hand, and this is quite typical for every CAD system. Every CAD system has an extremely horizontal customer base, simply because the connection between these personas is that all of them are designing for manufacturing. And manufacturing is manufacturing. If you are CNC milling, then you are CNC milling. Of course, clearly there is there's also a spectrum, and you need different type of CNC milling for woodworking and for cutting metal, but still the foundations are quite similar, and the required outputs for these inputs for these manufacturing technologies are very similar. So basically, if you want to design for manufacturing, you will just need a CAD system, and typically this is why CAD systems have an extremely diverse and horizontal customer base. for example, even for the market leader CAD system that is super like laser focused on mechanical engineering. As far as I know, only 60% of their customers are mechanical engineers, and the remaining 40% they even have architects and jewelry designers and woodworkers. So this is quite typical in the CAD industry. What is not very typical though is that we are definitely able to monetize not just traditional CAD users, but a much broader audience than that. And that's something that is obviously novel, and that's something that no other CAD company was able to do before.
We talked about this just a bit ago, but why don't you share this perspective too about kind of the trends? When you talk to an investor, vertical SaaS used to be the dream, and now it's kind of more pivoting towards this horizontal SaaS approach that you're just mentioning.
Yeah, I think that just like for CAD, even in the world of venture capital or in the world of software in general, the world has changed a lot. Categories like software categories or SaaS categories that were a bit overlooked and maybe a bit despised like 10 years ago, now they are becoming sexy. One of them is what you have mentioned, is that now horizontal SaaS companies are becoming more and more exciting, and we have seen quite a few success stories from horizontal SaaS in the last few years. Another one is that SMB SaaS, so building SaaS for small and medium-sized businesses, is becoming cool, while this was something that was considered to be completely unscalable a few
Death
years
Valley,
back.
basically.
Exactly. Like the saying was that you should just go after enterprise customers as soon as possible, and now this is changing. The world has changed a bit. The purchasing behavior of businesses and consumers have changed a lot. So even consumer SaaS is now a category. Actually, one of our investors, Nico Wittenborn, he is super bullish on App Store subscriptions, and this is his investment thesis, that he's investing in the best app subscription businesses.
Wow.
Exclusively, because he thinks that consumer subscriptions are going to be a really, really huge business, and apparently he's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of capitalizing on the whole power of the subscription model in the first place, right?
Yes.
If somebody's just paying for something once, that's not as profitable as getting them on the hook for monthly recurring revenue.
And also subscriptions allow you to provide much more value to the customer. So I think overall it's a win-win. Clearly, you will only have extremely engaged customers, but on the other hand, you will be able to provide value for them in the long term, like on a bi-weekly basis or on a monthly basis. And that's something that previous software business models did not really enable.
So tell us about Shapr's. What's your kind of, how do you cater to these? What's your pricing model, basically? You have different tiers based on the number of, users in an organization?
Yeah. So for our self-service model, we have two subscriptions, a business and a standard subscription, which are $500 and $240 per year. We also provide monthly subscriptions for both tiers. And for enterprise customers, those are always custom deals. They always have, like special needs and very specific requirements. But basically, this is it. So it's a recurring subscription.
Did you think about being a one-time app purchase at one point? Was that ever part of the strategy?
It's not very scalable, and
with add-ons, like using that as like a Trojan horse, and then getting.
Yeah, so I really think that the future for software monetization, or not just the future, but the present actually, and even the past, the last 5 years, is really about subscriptions. I think it's really the only way that provides a win-win for both parties, for the software vendor and for the customer as well.
So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about fundraising, because you mentioned when you had your first startup, it was really, there just weren't a lot of options out there. But but now obviously that's changed, thankfully. So that was another kind of timing benefit with Shapr3D. Can you tell us a little bit about your fundraising journey?
Oh yeah. So we started in 2015, which was probably the last bad year of European tech fundraising.
What do you mean by that?
So that was basically the last year that was the first year when things started to heat up in Europe. And now it's like crazy hot, right? Even Sequoia has now a European office, which was, something that was unimaginable until a few years ago or a couple of years ago. So yeah, in 2015 we raised an angel round that was $50K US. Such rounds don't exist anymore. So basically, I think it's literally impossible to raise that much because the minimum ticket size is like 500K, I guess. So it was a very, very different world. And it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to just get 50K. It was a lot of work, really. It was crazy hard. It was insanely dilutive compared to the check size, but you didn't really have any options by the time. And that has completely changed over the last few years. So overall, we raised 12 million until today. And it became easier every year. In 2015, we raised 50K from an angel investor, Zsolt Weisbart, who, despite the round was dilutive, I think that probably it was one of our best deals in terms of investor value add, to be honest. Like Zsolt has been like a true partner during the entire journey, which is rare, and he has been incredibly helpful. Then we raised 125K from an Austrian investor team, Speed Invest. By the time they had a pre-seed arm of their venture fund that was called Pioneers Ventures, and it was a super small fund. It was a 5 million euro fund. Those kind of funds don't exist anymore as well. So fund sizes also grew a lot over the last few years. And basically from that 170 or 180K, we got to our actual seed round in 2018, which was led by InReach Ventures and Roberto Bonanzinga, who's the founder of InReach. And we had a few great investors joining the round, Lifeline Ventures and former Skyscanner executives. And that was a 1.3 million round. And then in 2019, we raised another round, our Series A. It was a small A round. That was a pretty hot round in terms of investor interest. We got like our firm sheet, I don't know, like after 4 weeks, I think, just after we started the process.
Why was it so sexy at the time? Was the product picking up? You had a good traction?
Yeah. So basically, we started to grow really fast. It took us 3 years to get the product right and to lay the foundations of the product. I mean, it's not the easiest thing to build a CAD system. It's really extremely hard. And but finally in 2018 we fixed the basics, and the product was still quite small and still it was still quite basic, but at least it was able to do what it did really well, which was very little, but at least that was solid. And so the product started to take off. We fixed a few things in our distribution as well, and then we started growing really, really fast. And that clearly helped a lot. And then just after 4 weeks, when we launched our fundraising process, we got our first term sheet, and it's always the first term sheet that is the hardest to get. Once you have the first one, it's much easier to get the second and third and 25th, and and then a couple of years later, early last year or mid last year, we raised accidentally a convertible loan. That was a 4.5 million round, which was mostly because we wanted to get an Ecobit on board, who's the investor I mentioned, this mobile first investor, because his value add was clearly extremely valuable for the company, what he knows and how well he understands the industry. That was super valuable. And I forgot to mention that our Series A was co-led by two of the best European early stage investors, Point Nine Capital and Creandum.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure there's so much you've learned through this whole process, and congratulations on getting
Thanks.
the attention of some of these top tier investors.
Yeah.
Even your perspective and your insights. I mean, you have the experience, your assumptions now about how investing work is different than even how it works locally in the Hungarian ecosystem. But so how do you accidentally raise on a convertible note? Can you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, so the venture capital market in general is quite hot at the moment, and there is a lot of capital on the market, but there are not too many great companies. And so basically the demand supply ratio is crazy. It's uncomparable to anything that we have seen in the last 100 years, and it's something that makes it much easier to launch companies and to raise funds.
If you're good.
Yes, and that's the key, right? So for the top 0.1% of the companies raising funds today, it's super easy. For the remaining 99.9%, it's just as hard or maybe even harder. That means that also the deals are becoming more competitive, and investors are keen to allocate as much capital in the best companies as possible. So you can basically negotiate great terms. And now we are in a world where entrepreneurs have a lot of leverage, which was not the case 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is why you are seeing 10 million pre-seed rounds, pre-product and stuff like that, which is quite crazy. And it's something that nobody would have thought, I guess, until a few years ago.
Yeah. And so, so you've raised, you said 12 million altogether so far.
Yeah.
How big of your time was allocated to this process? I mean, do you feel like fundraising is something that, you always have to be thinking about and working on? Or do you feel like now, okay, you're funded for a little while, you can kind of take a breather?
Yeah, I would say that exponentially less over time.
Yeah.
So the first 50K, I think it took me how long? Like a year, maybe?
At like 90% of your time.
Maybe not 90%, but like from the beginning to the end, it took a lot of time. Then the seed round took me 6 months. Then the Series A round took me like 4 weeks.
4 weeks, yeah, that's what you said.
And then the convertible loan just happened.
Just fell in your lap?
Yes,
yeah,
basically.
Okay. So people are just throwing money at you now.
Yes. We are going pretty well. So if you think about Shapr, the most interesting thing about Shapr is that we are, as far as we know, we are the fastest growing CAD company in the last 30 years from the fraction of the funding of other companies that try to do the similar thing. And we are incredibly cash efficient, and we are growing quite fast in an industry that has not seen disruption for 30 years. So it looks like that we are onto something. We are onto something that a lot of other companies have tried with, like sometimes with better pedigree or sometimes with much more funding, like 20 times more funding. And still it looks like that we just hit a nerve. and that's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are some of the things that you're going to be spending your hard-earned investment capital on this year?
So first of all, it's always product.
Yeah.
We are super obsessed with making our customers happy, and building a CAD system is certainly not for the faint-hearted. It's just, if you just consider the depth and breadth of the features that you have to put into a CAD system, even to a very basic one, it's overwhelming. And so we are still like laser focused on product development. Our headcount is like 60% of our headcount is allocated on engineering still. This is not very typical, to be honest, in many SaaS companies. So most SaaS companies allocate much less of their resources on product. We allocate much more than the typical SaaS company, simply due to the domain that we are in. And of course, sales and marketing is always something that is quite expensive, and except for Shapr, but
Because you're cash efficient.
because we have very strong word of mouth,
Uh-huh.
and because our distribution model is completely different compared to traditional CAD systems. So traditional CAD systems heavily rely on reseller networks and channel partners, and that's expensive. To build those networks and to maintain those networks, it's expensive. While Shapr is following a low touch or zero touch product-led distribution approach that is heavily relying on consumer-facing channels, which is a pretty big innovation in the world of B2B software in general. We are not the only ones who are doing that, but we are definitely the only ones who are doing this in the CAD industry. So this makes us super cash efficient. But that doesn't mean that we are not allocating resources on marketing and growth. Of course we are. It's just that the way how we are allocating those resources, it's quite different from how other B2B companies are doing it. So I think that's the second biggest thing that we are spending on. And also we are going to geographically expand, meaning that we are considering opening new offices. We're not yet sure when, especially due to the pandemic. It's it's a bit hard to predict what's going to happen. But for example, we have extremely strong, completely organic growth in China. And of course, every Western company, or all the Western companies, are dreaming about conquering China and building an enormous business here because the market from the outside looks super appealing. But when they try to do it, they usually just hit a wall simply because it's culturally so different that usually their products, there is no demand for Western products very often in China because they have their own solution that is a better fit for the Chinese market. And also distribution is completely different in China. So the cultural barriers are huge. But when you have a product that is organically taking off, then it's a sign that you should double down on China. And we are seeing exactly that. We like China fully organically without investing in Chinese marketing or investing very little in Chinese marketing. We have amazing traction there. So that's something that we are quite excited about. But building a business in China is tough for a Western company. So this is something that we are trying to figure out at the moment, what to do with this.
Yeah, so you kind of started talking about this a little bit, but we've talked a bit about the product and how you're innovating there. But I think it's really an interesting part of your story, how you're innovating on the distribution side too. Yeah. And, getting this organic growth in China. What can you tell us about kind of what are your best channels or any interesting stories, like, what maybe was unexpected for you that turned out to be a great channel?
I would say all of them. No, seriously. It's quite crazy how so we experimented a lot early, and basically the things that we have found are quite surprising, and the way how we built this distribution engine is very much like a consumer distribution engine, but and this is something that probably 10 years ago would have been a complete failure. But the thing is that the purchasing behavior of businesses, like the software purchasing behavior of businesses, is changing or completely changed. Companies prefer to go through a self-service route.
Mm-hmm.
Companies prefer to evaluate software for themselves without going through a sales process.
I mean, this is classic kind of product-led growth,
yes,
right?
Exactly. So basically we are, and product-led growth doesn't mean that you don't need sales. Of course you need, especially for enterprise customers, you totally need sales, because for them it's really, really hard to buy something. I mean, the mechanics of buying for like serious, like getting
you have 10 approval committees and, and procurement. And
yeah,
blah,
exactly.
Blah, yeah.
Exactly. It's a complex process. So you have to help them with that process. But this product-led growth approach allows you to monetize very efficiently a very broad customer base. And I think this is part of the reason why SMB SaaS is becoming sexy, because now we have a distribution model for SMBs. And I think this is actually comes down to the fact that millennials and Gen Z are growing up. Like millennials are now, like soon becoming 40 years old. That's great. I'm a millennial, so that's quite crazy. And they are becoming a pretty big part of the workforce, or the majority of the workforce. And these generations grew up with iPhones in their hands, and they grew up with computers in their rooms, and with PlayStations, and they just they just don't understand why they would talk with anyone when it comes to buying software. They just socialize in a way that they were educated for decades that buying software is done through like Steam and through the App Store with a single tap. And somehow this is the behavior that you're seeing when it comes to B2B purchases as well. There is this common misconception, I think, that B2B buyers are more rational than consumer buyers. I think that's probably true, or maybe true for enterprise businesses or large enterprises, but definitely not true for the mid-market and the SMB market. As medium-sized businesses very often behave almost completely like consumers.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking as you were speaking. I mean, you have a B2B product that you're kind of marketing in B2C methods, right? Like you're on Instagram, like you're going through all of these, kind of social channels and everything.
Yeah, we have how many? 340,000 Instagram followers.
Yeah,
which is
insane.
which is the biggest follower base in the entire industry. We have just surpassed the biggest CAD company in terms of Instagram followers. Yeah, so we are quite bullish on that, and probably their Instagram budget is bigger than our entire marketing budget for the year. So that's and our product team or our content team has been doing an excellent job with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about your team. So how many people do you have now?
100.
Wow. Is everybody here in Hungary?
Not at the moment, but yes, So we mostly hired from Budapest, but we relocated a lot of people to Budapest. So we always hired internationally.
Then you brought people here.
Yeah, and we also hired a lot of expats who were already here. I think 15% maybe, or 20% of our headcount are foreigners, which is great. But that was never really intentional, to be honest. That just, I mean, staying in Budapest, that was really not completely intentional. We were never completely sure how far we can take the company just by being in Budapest. But so far, I think it was one of our greatest competitive advantages that we built this company from the local talent pool. The local talent pool is surprisingly great, and it's and these people, especially the most talented people, don't really want to work in the second-tier offices of big international companies. So I think that local companies have this exceptional opportunity to really, just cherry pick the top 0.1%. Which would be extremely hard in, I don't know, like in, San Francisco or Boston. So I think this is a huge advantage for local companies, not just for us, but for any other tech startup that is here. So we clearly don't want to stay forever completely in Budapest. So we're definitely going to need other offices, and we definitely want to tap into other talent pools. But so far, I've been more than happy with the local talent pool, and I also had doubts about how hard it is to relocate someone to Budapest, but it was not that hard, actually.
Yeah, you brought over a seasoned CMO, right, from the States?
Yes, the VP marketing. Yeah. So our former VP marketing, he's an American guy. He was the head of marketing at the biggest incumbent before, and we relocated him from Boston to Budapest, which was again something that was a bit unexpected, I think. Yeah, but apparently the city is, before COVID, it was amazing, right? Now it's just like any other city, I guess. But I think there's a lot of potential here.
Why was it surprising? I mean, where you didn't think, what were your concerns about trying to get somebody over?
So I didn't have any concerns, but I would say that everybody else did. So the common wisdom was that it's, like you have to build in a so-called tier 1 city, because otherwise you won't be able to relocate talent. And also there is this saying in VC circles that the quality of people is higher in certain locations. I don't really believe in that, but a lot of people do. I think it's just that you have to evaluate talent differently. And we had to figure it out for ourselves, how to evaluate talent. So you cannot rely on hiring for pedigree, right? You can't hire someone from Dropbox, or you can't hire someone from Figma. You have to figure out for yourself how to find and evaluate the best talent. But it's definitely not impossible, and I think it's easier than going into a crazy talent war in one of those cities, to be honest.
And how did you entice this person to come here? I mean, what was, I guess, I'm sure it comes down to the individual, but I agree with you. I think, Budapest also as a city has a lot to offer. And I think, speaking from experience, I know a lot of Americans would be happy to come, have a European adventure for a little while. I mean,
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's especially for an American, it's a bit exotic, right? Yeah. And, it has this, Eastern European smell, and oh my God, I can go to Croatia for a vacation and stuff like that. So I think that sounds great to a lot of people. That certainly helps. But eventually, it really just comes down to the person, and there are some people who love to travel and love to live anywhere in the world or try out new things. For example, our former VP marketing, previously he lived in Japan. And before that, he lived in Boston, but originally he's from California. So it's something that I think he was quite excited about to try out something new.
Yeah.
But you can find these people.
Yeah.
It's definitely not impossible. You just have to prepare for a lot of rejections, obviously. But if you're recruiting, you will get a lot of rejections anyway.
So you approached him. So you kind of.
In that case, this was an exception. Uh-huh. So in this case, we actually just posted a job post on our LinkedIn, and he applied. This was like,
so there you go.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a bit different, but if you have an amazing recruitment team, as we do, then they will be able to find international talent. And of course, don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming that Budapest is the number one target location for foreigners, but it's certainly not as bad as most people think.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people tend to get bogged down by the salary differential because, but I think increasingly you see this even in the US, people are, and because of COVID too, this is only accelerating this. People are happy to move to a place, where the quality of life
Oh, yeah.
is maybe the same, and it's just happens to be a cheaper
Sure.
location, and they're happy to
Sure.
take the pay cut to have that balance.
Of course. I think it requires a mindset change, but that's it. It's like
Yeah.
probably people or software engineers in, for example, in North Carolina don't make much more, or maybe don't even make more than software engineers in Budapest.
Yeah.
And that's something that people had to realize. Of course, it's really, really hard to evaluate the actual value of your pay, I guess. Really hard. I don't even think it's fully comparable, right? Because there are a lot of aspects of this that cannot be expressed in terms of money.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, it's not impossible to relocate people to Budapest.
Facebook and Google just announced their kind of remote policy now, that anybody can apply to be remote. And if they move to a different location, their salary just gets adjusted to that market rate. So I think that's, cool. Another topic around the team. So you are famously or infamously maybe a solo founder.
I am.
How is that intentional? How did that end up? What are kind of maybe the pros and cons of this?
Yeah, it was definitely not intentional. So it was not like that I had 25 amazing applicants for the co-founder role and I rejected all of them. I don't think that you think like that when you are starting a company, to be honest. Also, there is, I think there's a lot of BS around what it's like to be a solo founder and why it's better to have a co-founder. Yeah, sure. There were times when I wished for a co-founder. That's true. But that's, I think, not something that you want for, because that would help you from a business perspective, or at least for me, it was more like having someone that I can share the journey with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard when you don't have anyone. Like, no one else has the same perspective as the founder, and that makes it sometimes tough when it's a roller coaster, right? And when you are going through a down phase and you don't have anyone to share with, that's tough, obviously. So I think that's the most important thing where a co-founder can help.
It sounds like Zsolt, your first angel, was maybe a little bit playing this role, or you said he was very active and hands-on in the early stages.
I think he is the closest thing that I have to a co-founder. But also he has an external perspective, not an internal one, which is a bit different. It's very different actually, but that's exactly why it's super helpful, because I always have an external eye, which is great.
Was this a challenge at all in your fundraising process? I mean, clearly no, because you've gotten several rounds, but initially.
It was initially, especially in the pre-seed round, it was like, oh yeah, God. So in 2015, I think European venture capital was trying to learn a lot from US venture capital. And the European venture capital was trying to mimic a lot of things that US venture capital was doing, but they didn't realize that US venture capital, the way how it works, it was invented for the US, for that cultural context, for that geographical context, for that context in general, right? And I think a lot of those were a lot of those patterns were learned by European investors and were applied without actually understanding why those patterns were created in the US. And I think that this was really one of them, that this was the common wisdom by the time, that never invest in a solo founder. But now I don't think this is an issue to anyone, to be honest.
So Shapr3D started off and has been consistently a product, an Apple app store product. Can you talk a little bit about your plans to expand to other platforms?
Sure. So we have recently launched our Mac product as well. So now Shapr is available on Mac and iPad. And we already have Shapr3D for Windows in the hands of 100 beta testers. And very, very soon it's going to be rolled out to the first 10,000 people who signed up in the last couple of months. And And then we are launching it publicly by the end of the year, or in early Q4, end of Q3. So we are quite excited about that. So
how long has that been in the works?
Not that long. So we have, I think, one of the most efficient and highest quality native product engineering teams in the world. I mean, seriously, I'm very proud of the quality of that team, and like we started to work on that project several times before, but eventually we just canceled the project. But if we look at the actual starting point of that project, it took us less than a year.
Wow.
To build the Windows product. And
how big was the team working on that?
It's quite small. It's around 5 people, but it's not a fair comparison to the other products, because the code base is largely shared between the two platforms. At least 50% or even more of the code base is shared between the two platforms. And also, when you are porting to a new platform, you don't have to reinvent everything from scratch. So when you are really just implementing what you already implemented on another platform, it's much easier than when you are trying to figure out things from scratch.
But in terms of now, you're going to have to be maintaining the product on 2 platforms. Is that going to be, double the work in some ways, or
no, not at all, not even close. So Shapr is built in a way that makes it really, really easy, or relatively easy, to maintain multiple platforms, and building the product for 3 different platforms definitely doesn't require 3 times more effort. Maybe like 1.5 times more effort, but definitely not 3 times more effort. So no, it's not even slowing us down, because it's a really it's a process that you can parallelize really well.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, István. This has been super informative. Thanks for sharing all the details about your journey and how it's been going. I have one last question for you. We talked a little bit about your advice, when you're doing fundraising, but if overall you have any suggestions for aspiring founders who might be getting into this startup world, what's something you can tell them to inspire them on their journey?
I think I can't tell them anything because if I had to tell them something to inspire them, then they are not the right founders.
Oh.
The ones who succeed usually are the ones who don't give a crap about what others say. So I'm not going to waste their time.
Very strong words. Do you have any final messages you want to leave for our audience?
Thanks for listening.
All right. And check out Shapr3D for Surface coming this fall.
Exactly. Sign up for the Windows beta.
I'll be your spokesperson. Yeah. All right. This was awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck to you as you keep crushing it in the world of manufacturing and design software.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified when we release new episodes. Tune in next time as we continue to deep dive and uncover more hidden gems in the Untold Stories podcast. Check out our show notes for more resources about the topics we discuss and anything we mentioned during the podcast. Let us know what was your key takeaway from today's episode. And if you found this content useful, please feel free to share it with anyone else you think would benefit from it.